Hello, everyone. It is the following day. Don't mind how bright it is. In fact, I'm gonna switch to the low light because it is 10 p.m. Yes, I haven't been able to get much done today. I think I'm fucking depressed. Alright, so ignore my lack of efficiency, so to speak. I can't keep that streak forever. There we go, close that, and then, boom, okay, good. Alright. Today, I'm gonna try and finish, Arendt's, second chapter. Probably shouldn't call it chapter. I called it chapter in the first part. I'll call it the rest of part 2, and I think that is chapters 7, 8, maybe 9. What the fuck? Well, just let's try and finish chapter 2. I don't know how many there are, but okay. Alright, here goes. I have my retainers in. Yes, again. So I'll be very depressed, so to speak, and my jaw will hurt. But enough dilly-dally, let's go. So, chapter 7. The public realm, the common. I don't want to hold the phone for this long, so I'll just put it on my computer. Sorry for the lack of vision. Alright. The term public signifies two closely interrelated but not altogether identical phenomena. It means, first, that everything that appears in public can be seen and heard by everybody and has the widest possible publicity. For us, appearance, something that is being seen and heard by others as well as by ourselves, constitutes reality. Compared with the reality that comes from being seen and heard, even the greatest forces of intimate life, the passions of the heart, the thoughts of the mind, the delights of the senses, lead an uncertain, shadowy kind of experience unless and until they are transformed, deprivatized, and de-individualized, as it were, into a shape to fit them for public appearance. The most current of such transformations occurs in storytelling and generally in artistic transposition of individual experiences. But we do not need the form of the artist to witness this transfiguration. Each time we talk about things that can be experienced only in privacy or intimacy, we bring them out into a sphere where they will assume a kind of reality which, their intensity notwithstanding, they never could have had before. The presence of others who see what we see and hear what we hear assures us of the reality of the world and ourselves. And while the intimacy of a fully developed private life, such as had never been known before the rise of the modern age and the concomitant decline of the public realm, will always greatly intensify and enrich the whole scale of subjective emotions and private feelings. This intensification will always come to pass at the expense of the assurance of the reality of the world and men. Let me just look over what I just read. Sometimes I tend to read things that I tend to speak them and not think them, you know? So I guess others listening to us gives us, um, so to speak, others listening to us gives us um, certainty in the existence of the world and so forth. I don't know, like yeah, so to speak, like feeding Lila. I'm feeding Lila. Indeed, the most intense feeling we know of, intense to the point of blotting out all other experiences, namely the experience of great bodily pain, is at the same time the most private and least communicable of all. Not only is it perhaps the only experience which we are unable to transform into a shape fit for public appearance, it actually deprives us of our feeling for reality to such an extent that we can forget it more quickly and easily than anything else. There seems to be no bridge from the most radical subjectivity, in which I am no longer recognizable, to the outer world of life. Pain, in other words, truly a borderline experience between life as being among men, inter homines esse, and death, is so subjective and removed from the world of things and men that it cannot assume an appearance at all. Since our feeling for reality depends utterly upon appearance, and thus upon the existence of a public realm into which things can appear out of the darkness of sheltered existence, even the twilight which illuminates our private and intimate lives is ultimately derived from the much harsher light of the public realm. Yet there are a great many things which cannot withstand the implacable bright light of the constant presence of others on the public scene. There, only what is to be considered to be relevant, worthy of being seen or heard, can be tolerated, such that the irrelevant becomes automatically a private matter. This, to be sure, does not mean that private concerns are generally irrelevant. On the contrary, we shall see that there are very relevant matters which can survive only in the realm of the private. For instance, love, in distinction from friendship, is killed, or rather extinguished, the moment it is displayed in public. Never seek to tell thy love that never told can be. That was just a quote. Because of its inherent worldlessness, love can only become false and perverted when it is used for political purposes, such as the change or salvation of the world. Interesting. What the public realm considers irrelevant can have such an extraordinary and infectious charm that a whole people may adopt it as their way of life, without, for that reason, changing its essentially private character. Modern enchantment with small things, though preached by early 20th century poetry in almost all European tongues, has found its classical presentation in the petit bonheur of the French people. Since the decay of their once great and glorious public realm, the French have become masters in the art of being happy among small things within the space of their own four walls, between chest and bed, table and chair, dog and cat and flower pot, extending to these things a care and tenderness which, in a world where rapid industrialization constantly kills off the things of yesterday to produce today's objects, may even appear to be the world's last purely humane corner. Ooh boy. This enlargement of the private, the enchantment, as it were, of a whole people, does not make it public, does not constitute a public realm, but, on the contrary, means only that the public realm has almost completely receded. so that greatness has given way to charm everywhere. For while the public realm may be great, it cannot be charming precisely because it is unable to harbor the irrelevant. Second, the term public signifies the world itself, insofar as it is common to all of us and distinguished from our privately owned place in it. This world, however, is not identical with the earth or with nature, as a limited space for the movement of men and the general condition for organic life. It is related, rather, to the human artifact, the fabrication of human hands, as well as to affairs which go on among those who inhabit the man-made world altogether. To live together in the world means essentially that the world of things is between those who have it in common, as the table is located between those who sit around it. The world, like every in-between, relates and separates men at the same time. The public realm, as the common world, gathers us together and yet prevents our falling over each other, so to speak. What makes mass society so difficult to bear is not the number of people involved, or at least not primarily, but the fact that the world between them has lost its power to gather them together, to relate and to separate them. The weirdness of the situation resembles a spiritualistic seance, where a number of people gathered around the table might suddenly, through some magic trick, see the table vanish from their midst, so that two persons sitting opposite one another were no longer separated, but also would be entirely unrelated to each other by anything tangible. Interesting. Historically, we know of only one principle that was ever devised to keep a community of people together who had lost their interest in the common world and felt themselves no longer related and is separated by it. To find a bond between people strong enough to replace the world was the main political task of early Christian philosophy, and it was Augustine who proposed to found not only the Christian brotherhood, but all other human relationships on charity. But this charity, though its worldlessness clearly corresponds to the general human experience of love, is at the same time clearly distinguished from it being in being something which, like the world, is between men. What? But its charity to its worldlessness. Though its worldlessness, I see. It's the same thing clearly distinguished. Even robbers have between them inter se what they call charity. This surprising illustration of the Christian political principle is in fact very well chosen, because the bond of charity between people, while it is incapable of founding a public realm of its own, is quite adequate to the main Christian principle of worldlessness, and is admirably fit to carry a group of essentially worldless people through the world, a group of saints or a group of criminals, provided only that it is understood that the world itself is doomed and every activity in it is undertaken with the proviso quando mundus durat, that is, as long as the world lasts. The unpolitical, non-public character of the Christian community was early defined in the demand that it should form a corpus, or body, whose members were to be related to each other like brothers of the same family. The structure of communal life was modeled on relationships between the members of a family because these were known to be non-political and even anti-political. A public realm had never come into being between the members of a family, and it was therefore not likely to develop from Christian community life if this life was ruled by the principle of charity and nothing else. Even then, as we know from the history and the rules of the monastic orders, the only communities in which the principle of charity as a political device was ever tried, the danger that the activities undertaken under the necessity of private life, necessitas vitae praesentis, would lead by themselves. What? Because they were performed in the presence of others, to the establishment of a kind of counterworld, a public realm within the orders themselves, was great enough to require additional rules and regulations, the most relevant one in our context being the prohibition of excellence and its subsequent pride. Let me just read that sentence again. Why does Arendt just love to shy away from periods? Come on. So even then, as we know from the history and the rules of the monastic orders, which are the only communities in which the principle of charity as a political device was ever tried, the danger that the activities under the necessity of present life would lead by themselves, but because they were performed in the presence of others, to the establishment of a kind of counterworld, which was a public realm within the orders themselves, was great enough to require additional rules and regulations, the most relevant one in their context being the prohibition of excellence and its subsequent pride. Okay. What the hell? Worldlessness as a political phenomenon is possible only on the assumption that the world will not last. On this assumption, however, it is almost inevitable that worldlessness, in one form or another, will begin to dominate the political scene. This happened after the downfall of the Roman Empire, and, albeit for quite other reasons and in very different, perhaps even more disconsolate forms, it seems to happen in our own days. The Christian abstention from worldly things is by no means the only conclusion one can draw from the conviction that the human artifice, a product of mortal hands, is as mortal as its makers. This, on the contrary, may also intensify the enjoyment and consumption of the things of the world, all matters of intercourse in which the world is not primarily understood to be the koinon, that which is common to all. Only the existence of a public realm and the world's subsequent transformation into a community of things which gathers men together and relates them to each other depends entirely on permanence. If the world is to contain a public space, it cannot be erected for one generation and planted for the living only. It must transcend the lifespan of mortal men. Without this transcendence into a potential earthly immortality, no politics, strictly speaking, no common world, and no public realm is possible. Unlike the common good as Christianity understood it, the salvation of one's soul as a concern common to all, the common world is what we enter when we are born and what we leave behind when we die. It transcends our lifespan into past and future alike. It was there before we came and will outlast our brief sojourn in it. It is what we have in common not only with those who live with us, but also with those who were here before and with those who will come after us. But such a common world can survive the coming and going of the generations only to the extent that it appears in public. It is the publicity of the public realm which can absorb and make shine through the centuries whatever men may want to save from the natural ruin of time. Through many ages before us, but now not anymore, men enter the public realm because they wanted something of their own, or something they have in common with others, to be more permanent than their earthly lives. Thus, the curse of slavery consisted not only in being deprived of freedom and of visibility, but also in the fear of these obscure people themselves, that from being obscured they should pass away, leaving no trace that they have existed. There is perhaps no clearer testimony to the loss of the public realm in the modern age than the almost complete loss of authentic concern with immortality, a loss somewhat overshadowed by the simultaneous loss of the metaphysical concern with eternity. The latter being the concern of the philosophers and the vita contemplativa must remain outside our present considerations, but the former is testified to by the current classification of striving for immortality with the private vice of vanity. Under modern conditions, it is indeed so unlikely that anybody should earnestly aspire to an earthly immortality that we probably are justified in thinking that it is nothing but vanity. The famous passage in Aristotle, considering human affairs, one must not consider man as he is, and not consider what is mortal in mortal things, but think about them only to the extent that they have the possibility of immortalizing, occurs very properly in his political writings. For the polis was for the Greeks, as the res publica was for the Romans. First of all, their guarantee against the futility of individual life, the space protected against this futility and reserved for the relative permanence, if not immortality, of mortals. What the modern age thought of the public realm after the spectacular rise of society to public prominence was expressed by Adam Smith when, with disarming sincerity, he mentions that unprosperous race of men commonly called men of letters, for whom public admiration makes always a part of their reward, a considerable part in the profession of physic, a still greater perhaps in that of law. In poetry and philosophy it makes almost the whole. Here it is self-evident that public admiration and monetary reward are of the same nature and can become substitutes for one another. Public admiration, too, is something to be used and consumed, and status, as we would say today, fulfills one need as food fulfills another. Public admiration is consumed by individual vanity, as food is consumed by hunger. Obviously, from this viewpoint, the test of reality does not lie in the public presence of others, but rather in the greater or lesser urgency of needs to whose existence or non-existence nobody can ever testify except the one who happens to suffer them. And since the need for food has its demonstrable basis of reality in the life process itself, it is also obvious that the entirely subjective pangs of hunger are more real than vainglory, as Hobbes used to call the need for public admiration. And even if these needs, through some miracle of sympathy, were shared by others, their very futility would prevent their ever establishing anything so solid and durable as a common world. The point, then, is not that there is a lack of public admiration for poetry and philosophy in the modern world, but that such admiration does not constitute a space in which things are saved from destruction by time. The futility of public admiration, which daily is consumed in ever greater quantities, on the contrary, is such that monetary reward, one of the most futile things there is, can become more objective and more real. As distinguished from this objectivity, whose only basis is money as a common denominator for the fulfillment of all needs, The reality of the public realm relies on the simultaneous presence of innumerable perspectives and aspects in which the common world presents itself, and for which no common measurement or denominator can ever be devised. For though the common world is the common meeting ground of all, those who are present have different locations in it, and the location of one can no more coincide with the location of the other than the location of two objects. Being seen and being heard by others derive their significance from the fact that everyone sees and hears from a different position. This is the meaning of public life, compared to which even the richest and most satisfying family life can offer only the prolongation or multiplication of one's own position with its attending aspects and perspectives. The subjectivity of privacy can be prolonged and multiplied in a family. It can even become so strong that its weight is felt in the public realm. But this family world can never replace the reality rising out of the sum total of aspects presented by one object to a multitude of spectators. Only when things can be seen by many in a variety of aspects without changing their identity, so that those who are gathered around them know they see sameness in other diversity, can world reality truly and reality... give me a second. Let me restart that sentence. Only where things can be seen by many in a variety of aspects without changing their identity, so that those who are gathered around them know they see sameness in other diversity, can worldly reality truly and reliably appear. Under the conditions of a common world, reality is not guaranteed primarily by the common nature of all men who constitute it, but rather by the fact that, differences of position and the resulting variety of perspectives notwithstanding, everybody is always concerned with the same object. If the sameness of the object can no longer be discerned, no common nature of men, least of all the unnatural conformism of a mass society, can prevent the destruction of the common world, which is usually preceded by the destruction of the many aspects in which it presents itself to human plurality. This can happen under conditions of radical isolation, where nobody can any longer agree with anybody else, as is usually the case in tyrannies. But it may also happen under conditions of mass society or mass hysteria, where we see all people suddenly behave as though they were members of one family, each multiplying and prolonging the perspective of his neighbor. In both instances, men have become entirely private, that is, they have been deprived of seeing and hearing others, of being seen and being heard by them. They are all imprisoned in the subjectivity of their own singular experience, which does not cease to be singular if the same experience is multiplied innumerable times. The end of the common world has come when it is seen only under one aspect and permitted to present itself in only one perspective. Oh boy. I'll do a quick water break and do some other things, and then I'll do chapter 8 in another video, because my voice is fucked up already. And I gotta make sure I remember this, because last time it really felt like things were just passing me by. I gotta actually remember what I just read, so